Welcome to the Functional and Integrative Medicine Podcast. This podcast is all about exploring root cause medicine, showcasing the power of this approach, and inspiring other medical providers to follow this incredible path. I'm your host, Ginger Allen, and founder of Your Medical Liaison, a medical marketing agency working with medical providers since 2012. My passion for root cause medicine and provider advocacy drives me to help medical providers who have incorporated functional and integrative medicine into their practices. So let's dive in. Excited. This guest brings a rare depth of expertise and passion to the field of integrative oncology because her journey began not just as a physician, but as a patient. Diagnosed with stage 4 terminal ovarian cancer at 19, Dr. Nasha Winters turned her personal healing journey into a mission to transform cancer care. She's an internationally recognized integrative oncology expert, best-selling author of The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, and Mistletoe and the Emerging Future of Integrative Oncology. She's also the host of Metabolic Matters podcast. As co-founder and chief medical officer of the Terrain Holdings Company, Dr. Nasha is helping to shape the future of personalized cancer care. A trusted consultant to practitioners and researchers worldwide, she combines standard of care oncology with vetted metabolic and complementary therapies to improve outcomes and quality of life. She's also pioneering the development of the first residential integrative oncology hospital and recently launched a metabolic research lab, which will be advancing early detection and individualized treatment strategies. Dr. Nasha's work is data-driven, compassionate, and truly groundbreaking. And needless to say, she's also super famous. So I'm so excited to have you on the show, Dr. Nasha. Thank you so much.
Ginger, what a joy. What a joy. I love it. Before you started recording, it was really fun to know how our worlds collided. And it's an absolute honor to be here with you. Thank you for being exactly what this is, a liaison and bringing these worlds together. So thank you for the opportunity.
Now, I know you kind of I shared in your bio that you were diagnosed with ovarian cancer, but can you give us, fast forward to kind of your professional journey and how did you, get into the functional and integrative medicine? Because, I'm thinking, okay, you're diagnosed with ovarian cancer at 19. That's a very aggressive, very dangerous cancer. I'm assuming that you were sent down the traditional route. I don't know. So tell us how you had to get here.
Sure. Well, I was very much passionate about getting into conventional medicine. That was my pre-med work in undergraduate. I was the summer before my sophomore year in college, my health started really acting up. Truth be told, I don't know if I knew what health was. Prior to my diagnosis, I'd had a whole collection dish of previous diagnoses from IBS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. I had lots and lots of anxiety patterns, cystic acne, digestive upset in general, just so many things, right? But it was all normalized. So there was a pill for that ill. And so, early ages, being put on different medications. And I was still like the top of my game. I was, head of my volleyball team and student body president and grade A student and advanced courses. Like on the outside of the world, I looked great. On the inside, I felt terrible, but I just pushed through. That was just the way it was. So when things started really getting worse in the summer before my sophomore year of college, the doctors just thought it was more of the same. They're like, oh, it's just this part of your condition flaring or this part. And again, I was a curious, pre-med student. So I was like bedazzled by the whole medical establishment. And yet what started to happen is each time I'd land in that emergency room, I would be treated more and more like a big old glob of gum on the bottom of somebody's shoe. I started being treated like a histrionic, teenager, drug-seeking teenager. And yet, no matter how much I begged and pleaded and cried as saying something's different, something's wrong, I don't feel right, those drugs don't help me, they make me sicker, they just would sort of dismiss me over and over until a roommate found me unconscious at home and rushed me to the emergency room, at which time I met with a different doctor who the next 6 hours of being properly worked up and him coming in, me consoling him as he cried uncontrollably because he had a daughter my age, as he landed the news that they knew I had cancer. They didn't know exactly where it started from, but they had a good idea and that there was basically nothing they could do. And so this is me in an emergency room, in September of 1991. My roommate sitting there next to me, like both of us just in utter shock. And because that was the last thing I thought we'd have. So what proceeded to happen is, they got me stabilized. They pulled fluid out of my abdomen. They sent off for pathology for everything. And it would still take a few weeks before I had the official diagnosis, which came on October 21st of 1991, which was stage 4 ovarian cancer. I had a grapefruit-sized tumor in my right ovary. I had lesions in my liver all throughout my abdomen. I had 100% bowel blockage, which is what actually landed me in the emergency room. Nothing going in, nothing going, and everything coming out. Excruciating pain. I was severely cachectic or sarcopenic. I had fluid buildup in my lungs, around my heart. My oxygen levels were in the 70s. My kidney function was done because my tumor was pressing up against that. I was in the end stage. And so what they explained to me at the emergency room that night was that they could make me comfortable, but I was not strong enough, nor could they do any treatment for me. There were no treatments available. So that was a moment for me of realizing that, first of all, I didn't expect to beat it, didn't expect to fight it. I just wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand why, first of all, this was missed for so long. And second of all, why, especially in 1991, this was not common or normal. Still not normal. Unfortunately, it's more common. But back then, I was left to my own devices. They basically sent me home, got me in with a second opinion, which had an even more grim prognosis than what they shared. And no one expected me to see 1992. So that is where the story started. And so my enamored, I'm going to go to medical school, I'm pre-med, here I am, being completely just basically thrown out into pasture by the very people I aspired to be, was the first hit to that decision. Now, in 1991, we didn't have a Dr. Google. We didn't know anything about alternative medicine. What little bits you knew about alternative medicine were very much framed in as charlatans, and very not steeped in data. I was still a scientist through and through, but I still wanted to understand what was happening in me that standard of care couldn't explain. And so I guess, Ginger, the story for me is that I'm still learning over 34 years later of what that process was all about for myself. I have now had the unbelievable pleasure of working directly with tens of thousands of patients directly and hundreds of thousands indirectly from training clinicians in my methodology to hear these stories that I share with you over and over again of patients who were really disempowered and really ignored of their own instincts or their own, process, their own involvement in their own healthcare. And so for me, I think so much of what I learned early on was about, patient sovereignty, patient responsibility, being believed when you're having issues going on, and how you could be more of a participant in the process versus, just a recipient of the process. So I think that was one of my big ahas. And then for your listeners to know, when I was sent home to die, even after the second evaluation, I ended up going to the library instead. And I accidentally stumbled upon a book. This is 1991, mind you, by an unknown author of the time, Deepak Chopra, and a book called Quantum Healing. And that book was like my first awareness that there was something more out there than what I was learning in my undergrad pre-med studies and what anybody would learn in conventional medical school. And so it really set forth a beautiful path for me to keep exploring. And to this day, I'm still doing that. I travel all over the world. I have for decades, meeting healers, meeting clinicians, meeting researchers, both from standard of care and even from indigenous wisdom and quote unquote alternative care all over the globe that brings something of value to the table, and also help us understand that there's no such thing as a single target and a single treatment, that we are all an N of one. And I believe that that's what things like functional, integrative, alternative, naturopathic, these ancient medical systems do well, is to look at the individual and make them the center of the equation, and not the disease diagnosis the center of the equation.
Wow. I had no idea that that was your journey into this. That's quite a way to start.
Yeah.
So, well, first of all, I mean, I'd like to dive into this a little bit more. I mean, I know that, you know, my listeners can go and get your book and they can learn about all of your teachings and they can take your courses. And so I'm not going to really try to spend a bunch of time in this show educating them, because they can go and get your education. But what I would like to take a little time, if you don't mind, be delving into like your life and like how you dealt with that fight for your life and how you made it through. If you wouldn't mind, just because.
Yeah, it's compelling. I know, I recognize that, you know, for me, I've lived it so long that it's really like, boring. But other people, you know, when they first hear it, they're like, wait, what? One thing that's very interesting to me is in the first few years of my diagnosis, no one wanted to talk to me about it. Like, I was like, why am I still here? When I started to reach out to the people who initially diagnosed me, you know, into the early part of 1992, they didn't know what to say to me. And they literally blocked me. Like, they're like, we got nothing to offer you here, just go away. Like, it was so uncomfortable because I believe now, looking back, that I was brushing up against kind of a serious cognitive dissonance of everyone expected me to be dead, and when I wasn't, they did not know what to do with that information. It basically made them question everything they knew to be true in this world.
So you did not move forward with any type of traditional radiation,
it
or
wasn't offered. They like literally said, we can't, because a stage 4, you don't typically rush in for surgery first, right?
Okay.
So, but a stage 4, you start with what we call neoadjuvant. You start with some chemotherapy to push back the tumor burden enough to then come in, remove the tumor, and then come back in and finish with that. Well, back in 1991, we weren't even doing that back then. But I was too sick. There's no way they could have opened me up. Like, I did not have the vitals to do it. You know, you've got to be strong enough to go into surgery.
Sure.
I was not strong enough to go into surgery. Plus I had fluid in all the wrong places. And, you know, I had all these different things happening with my kidney, liver, and bowel function. The other side of it is because my kidneys were completely shut down and my liver was shut down, I could not take chemotherapy because they depend on those organs of elimination to be utilized and processed out. So especially the platinum drugs, which were the drug of choice for, and still are today, for ovarian cancer, they are known nephrotoxins. So they're known to be extremely toxic to the kidneys, and my kidney function was completely shut down. So there was no way they could do that. The Taxols that are typically used, the taxanes, which are typically used for this, also have extreme impact on the lungs, which I had tons of fluid and scarring in my lungs, as well as the liver, could not process that. So there was nothing they could do, and no one was doing radiation at that time. And it was also such a large tumor, pushing like over to my bladder, my vagina, my ureters, my kidney, taking up that whole bowl of my abdomen. They would have to hit multiple places. The radiation we were using back in the early 90s was extremely
right.
It was shrapnel. Right? They would have destroyed any, you know, quality of life. And because of the stage that I was in, the state that I was in, they didn't expect me. They told me up to 3 months. As a doctor, looking back now and what I've learned, they didn't expect me to live 3 days. I was in the absolute end of the line at the time I showed up in the hospital. And when they started pulling the fluid out of my abdomen, known as ascites, it gave me enough relief that I could like feel like, okay, I'm okay in this moment. But it would fill up so quickly, I was needing to come in every few days to have it drained. So in those first couple months, they were making me comfortable. In the beginning, I needed 2 or 3 drains a week, and then only 2 a week, and then only 1 a week, and then 1 every couple weeks. And then it kind of slowly dried up. And part of that, Ginger, was the accidental with a bowel blockage. Even today in standard of care, if you have a bowel blockage, their first line of defense is 100% bowel rest. And what that means is fasting. The fancy name of that, or the not so fancy name, is fasting. So this always freaks people out, but I'm going to share it here. And it's just my reality. And if you don't believe me, the power of this,
you believe everything you say.
Well, you can also follow the work of Dr. Katie Deming, who is a radiation oncologist who was like the head of her game in standard of care oncology, even like the head of the entirety of oncology in all of California, like a badass in this arena. And she even has come full circle. The only thing she does with her patients now is long-term water fasts. And so, you might get her on your show, because talk about a woman who was embedded deeply in the oncology conventional model, who's gone 100% the other side of it. We've actually become really good friends because, as you said, you're like the OG of this, Nasha. You were doing this accidentally on purpose back in the day. And now people are facilitating this on purpose with patients with great success. So for me, back then, I ended up not eating for 2.5 months. Could not eat anything solid for 2.5 months. And even the first, I would say, good 4 to 6 weeks, I couldn't even handle something as rich as a broth. It was too much. So what I could handle were tiny sips of water. And in my evaluation, I was able to find a paper about South American herb called tabebuia, also known as pau d'arco. And I was able to find that in my local little herbal shop in Durango, Colorado, called Dancing Willow Herbs, was able to get that for me. And I made a strong tea with it. And I would sip on the pau d'arco tea and on my water and salted water and lemon water every day for months and months on end. And for many years, months on end beyond that, but for 2 months for sure, that was it. And then I started to be able to get in some broths and some like very blended foods, and then slowly come back on track, if you will. But what I understood happening is the longer I fasted, the lower my inflammatory markers, the lower my angiogenic markers of driving that fluid buildup were diminishing, so that my ascites wouldn't recur. So the accident here, what I want your listeners to hear is, I wasn't following science at that time. All the things today, people like Dr. Walter Longo and his book, Fasting Cancer, and people like Katie Deming and her leading patients on 40-day water fasts, and stumbling upon the work of Otto Warburg from the early 19-teens, 1920s, or the work of Dr. Moreschi from 1909, who showed that fasting alone would debulk tumors, so shrink tumors. All the things I've learned retrospectively explain what was happening to me. Wow. What I accidentally stumbled upon. And so because I'm a scientist, that data didn't exist then, but I also knew what I was feeling in my body was also scientific evidence, right? I was having a very subjective experience, but also objective experience. My vaginal ultrasounds I was doing monthly at the time were showing the tumor on my ovary was shrinking. The abdominal ultrasounds were showing that the tumors on my liver were staying put and not making more. It showed that the fluid was clearly diminishing and going away in my belly, including what they call loculated fluid in the pockets where they couldn't drain it. It had started to resorb on its own. That was likely to the benefit of accidental forced fasting. And over time, that bowel blockage reversed. And I was able to start to get in more broths and more blended foods. And, I had to be very, very careful the first 2 years out, because anything I ate too fast or not right for my body would send me back into a partial blockage. So I had to tread very, very carefully for a long period of time. The things I learned today, that I now know today as a clinician, it took me a good decade of trial and error in my own body and experience to feel confident enough, and then to find the research to back it enough to start to apply it in my practice in the early 2000s. So wow. I just want folks to know, like, this wasn't a linear, I figured this out overnight. It was a lot of trial and error. And it was a lot of near-death experiences over a good decade. And so it took that, like the school of life enhanced what I learned. I even lied to get into medical school because I was afraid if they knew I was so sick, they wouldn't let me in. I had to lie to my undergraduate professors. Only one of them knew what was going on for me, because they would have pushed me out of the education program. I had to lie to employers of what was going on with me. Everyone thought I just had, because they all knew I had endometriosis history. So they just thought I was having really hard times, and they all thought I was a drama queen. So be it, right? I kept my cancer diagnosis very, very private for a lot of different reasons, which we don't have time to go into for your listeners, until about 2012. And
oh my gosh.
Even though I'd been working with patients in that capacity for a good decade, I was very private about my own experience, because I also knew it was my own experience, and I didn't want what I did. One of my biggest pet peeves are influencers. I can't believe I'm just saying this out loud, but there are a lot of people who get out there and say, this is the way I cured my cancer. This is how you do it. Go forth, right? That is a bad idea.
Yes, because everybody's
That I-
individual and unique.
Exactly.
What works for me is going to work for you.
Exactly. And so the first question people ask me is, what did you do? And I'm like, well, I'm still doing it. No one would likely consider me no evidence of disease today. So 34 years later, my body is living well with cancer. I've not done standard of care. That wasn't by choice. I didn't knowingly go this route. It was just an accident that kind of just kept perpetuating into learning something new and applying it, and learning something new and applying it, all over many, many decades. And then having the data to eventually catch up with what I was learning and experiencing within my own body and within the patients that I served. And so today it's amazing when I can look back and see all the things that I sort of was stumbling across is now being really well studied and really well validated and characterized, where a few years ago, this would have been a very much, you're a quack, this is really wrong. And now I train conventional oncologists in the methodologies I've come up with to help people test, to understand what's going on in the environment, to then assess, to understand the pattern, to therefore address, to choose, to curate the best possible therapy to match, or combination of therapies to match that pattern for that individual at that time. And then you continue that cycle of test, assess, address, test, assess, address, and you iterate as the data lets you know what's going on. Are you on the mark or are you off the mark? And how do we pivot to keep that person moving in the right direction? And that's what I've learned for myself, for, like I said, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and now train clinicians to learn that pattern recognition, as well as learn the tons of different tools we have at our fingertips, both in standard of care as well as integrative medical environments, to best support our patients.
Amazing. I'm just like amazed by that story. And, it reminds me as a layman, something I heard from one of Dr. Billstrom, my autoimmune functional MD that I told you I've been working with for 5 years. I believe he mentioned one time, and if I say this wrong, please correct me, but he said something like, we all have these genes within us. We have cancer genes, we have the autoimmune genes, and it's about turning them on or turning them off.
Yes.
And so we all have cancer within us, right? I think, and I'm saying that as a layman, doctor, but if you can delve into that a little bit, like explain to us how, I know the practitioners listening to this know what I'm talking about, but I just find it so fascinating that, we've all got these bad bugs and good bugs and bad genes and, and it's all about learning, I guess, for the individual, Dr. Nasha, what works for that individual to turn those bad bugs and those bad genes off.
Yeah. Well, I love it. What you're speaking to very explicitly, that is very well characterized in the scientific community, is epigenetics.
Yes. Thank you.
Right? So single nucleotide polymorphisms, these are the blueprints that all of us are born with.
Okay.
But it is up to us on how they express. Okay. So epi means above the gene. So yes, you might have been dealt this, hand of cards.
Right.
But how you choose to play them are on you, right? Many of us are playing our cards without knowing what cards we are holding. We're just like, it's a blind guessing game, right? So when someone says, I don't know how I got cancer, and they're so shocked, or I was healthy until I got cancer, I'm like, honey, child, that ain't possible. That is just not possible. You were unaware or disembodied or normalized into your experiences, or your labs were ignored. So for instance, today, labs are based on the average of the population. And I want to tell you all right now, do not be average. Because with 93% of Americans metabolically broken, that means less than 7% of us are actually healthy. So 93% of us are not. And so the fact now that it's a flip of a coin as to whether you're going to be met with a cancer diagnosis in your lifetime means please do your due diligence and don't just be in a guessing game and blindly playing the cards you were dealt. Please go deeper. Know what cards you were dealt. That is a source of empowerment, not an, oh my God, I have this terrible gene. No. Those are genes you can change the expression of with your diet, with your lifestyle, with your thoughts, with everything you're putting in, on, and around you, including people, places, and things. And so to your point, We all have cancer. We've known this for a very long time. All of us have cancer all of the time.
And nobody knows this, right? I mean, you know that
you in the scientific community, but the patients,
clinicians know it, but laymen's, we don't know this. Like, right? We just think
Right.
it's a diagnosis. We got screwed, God had it out for us, and it's not at all.
Right. Yeah. Even standard of care says upwards of 95% of cancers are absolutely diet and lifestyle driven. Meaning that less than, and even the 5% that they say are genetically driven, even those we can influence to some degree. So I just want people to know, if they're like, but I was given that absolute genetic variation, that's not necessarily true either, that's your destiny, right? And so let's use the example of BRCA. So a lot of people know this as the Angelina Jolie. By the way, BRCA is not a genetic set in stone mutation. It is a DNA repair mechanism. And BRCA can be you can change its expression by your diet and lifestyle. So for instance, here's one really weird one. I'm going to really upset a lot of people with this one, but BRCA is very, very, very sensitive to DNA damage. So that should right there intuitively, as a clinician at the very least, tell you these are the patients you do not want to expose to ionizing radiation. And yet, what do we do in standard of care? We mammogram these patients every 6 months. What the actual, right? Smash and radiate the most vulnerable population, the most vulnerable tissue. These are the patients that should be doing every 6-month breast ultrasounds, should be coached on how to know their breasts and do their own breast massage and know their own breast evaluation to know if there's any subtle change. Then they go and do an ultrasound. And if there's something weird there, then they go and do, at the very least, a non-radiation and non-contrast dye MRI or a contrast dye MRI, none of which have ionizing radiation, right? That's good medical care.
Isn't there a thermometer?
Thermography is,
right.
Think of thermography as like a terrain evaluation. It's showing patterns of heat. Exactly. Right. It is not sensitive or specific enough, because that heat map could just be saying you have fibrocystic breasts, you have estrogen dominance, you have a wound, you have mastitis. It does not tell you. So if you use thermography just as a general evaluation, I love to see those big blue orbs, like that's what we're looking for. If there's redness, or especially like a very particular patch of redness, I'm going to follow up with a breast exam and an ultrasound. Sure. And then depending on that information, go to the next, an MRI, right? This is the most ridiculous thing that we still have in mammograms in this country. There's a couple books out there on there's lots of studies. There's other countries who pulled this as care, because we only have about, upwards of 7% or so of the population have this BRCA mutation. But you don't know what you don't know until you know. So when we're out there smashing and radiating all kinds of breast tissue, and then especially when they learn they have BRCA or ATM or CHEK2 or GATA3 mutations, we're overly screening these folks, which is ironic because they're the ones who are most vulnerable to DNA damage from ionizing radiation. So we need to be thinking as clinicians differently on how to approach our patients, to look at their terrain, to empower them to know that there are other tools and resources to demand coverage of these types of imaging options. And we need to be more proactive in true prevention. Prevention is not putting a camera up somebody's butt or smashing and radiating the breast tissue. That's not prevention. That's just imaging.
Dr. Bill, again, he goes, the standard of care is the way we diagnose breast cancer is by doing a mammogram. He's like, we can do so much more preventative. I mean, there's so much more education and preventative stuff we can be doing. That's the standard of care. That's a horrible standard of care model. That this is how, we're diagnosing. So,
and the crazy is, like, every single place, with 350,000 cases of breast cancer diagnosed a year in the United States, instead of just waiting for mammogram to tell us what's going on, we need to be doing insulin growth factor, insulin, vitamin D levels, and body fat, body mass index on all these patients, because that's your true prevention, to optimize the D3, to insulin restrict, and to get their waist to hip ratio down and their endogenous fat distribution down. That is your prevention.
Yep. I have a girlfriend that just went through it, and she did it all holistically. And she was like, had I known what I know now, I could have prevented this, but I would have had to be thinking about it 5 years prior.
Exactly. Or 10 or 20 even. And so
exactly. We really need to bring this education to the forefront of the world of this prevention type model. And also, like you said, getting the right labs, doing the right, finding out what your genes are and, all of your stuff. So much knowledge there that's untapped.
Well, and this is where I think it's great. Like this conversation, I know it wasn't the direction we initially thought we were going to go, but it's such the perfect example of the bridge. What I'm sharing of the ways of testing is not alternative. This is not integrative. This should be standard of
care.
It should just be. So let me throw another thing to the doctors who may be listening, who've made decisions for their patients based on their own biases. So here's what I hear from doctors all the time. Well, I'm not going to run those labs for the patient because they're not covered by insurance. Well, as someone who ran a cash-based practice for 17 years and now encourage other doctors and patients and allied health professionals and patient advocates to leave the system to get proper care, this is where we are a mass to be reckoned with when we volume share. When we have direct-to-consumer labs available now, where what it used to cost for my patients to do an onboarding set of extensive terrain-centric labs, it used to cost my patients about $3,500 out of pocket. And I had plenty of patients, by the way, who did that happily.
Sure.
Because it was cheaper than paying so much for cancer. But today, we can get those same onboarding labs on well under $700. Right?
Wow.
So people can throw that onto a credit card. This is for someone who's got high propensity or even history of or current dealing with cancer. Then we can know exactly what they're dealing with. Then from that information, we can continue to do kind of a monthly set of labs to see, are we on the right track? Those labs, by the way, are about $25 a month out of pocket. Notice what I'm describing here. I have never had a patient, like when doctors say, well, they're not going to do it because insurance isn't covering it. My patients don't give a shit about insurance. They give a shit about their lives.
Nobody cares anything about when it comes to your life and a cancer diagnosis or even cancer prevention. People are not going to worry about the money.
No,
I mean, people find it.
That's the last thing there. So here's what's so cool. There are lots of functional health and integrative health. They've created packages and panels at cost-effective ways because of volume discounts with labs out there, like relationships with LabCorp and whatnot. So I want clinicians listening to be like, you need to remember you do not have to be beholden to the insurance model on that piece. The other thing that doctors do to patients is they say the dietary or the lifestyle modifications that are necessary to either create a preventative state or a resilient state or a prevention of recurrence state, they will also make the assertion that it's just too difficult for the patient. And then I get a little upset. And so for anyone listening, if I'm upsetting you, that's when I say, then doctor, you need to deal with your own BS around your own belief, your own diet, your own lifestyle choices, because you're overlaying your belief system on somebody else. If you come at every patient knowing they can make the necessary changes to save their own lives, those patients will be successful. If you come to that patient saying, they're not going to be able to maintain this diet or this lifestyle, guess what? They won't be. They won't be. And so our belief systems impact our patient outcomes. And there is actually plenty of data to back what I'm saying. And so the opportunity, I think, that happens when someone makes the walk across the bridge from just pure standard of care, institutionalized medicine, insurance-based medicine, disease management medicine, and walks over into health creation, patient empowerment, what happens most, the side effect, is that most doctors basically take a bite of their own medicine, right? They step into it for themselves first. And the most successful patients are those that have a relationship and see that their doctors are on the same journey of self-discovery and self-care that they are. And that's when we make the biggest splash of all.
I love that. And what a great way to kind of, wrap up this podcast. I mean, so important what you just shared, for practitioners that are listening. If my doctor tells me you're going to take this medication twice a day, every day for the next week, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to take that medication twice a day, every day for the next week. If my doctor says to me, you will not eat sugar for the next week, guess what I'm going to do? I'm not going to eat sugar for a week. But if the doctor says, well, I wouldn't recommend sugar, but I know that's going to be hard. You probably won't be able to do it, but, give it a try.
Love it.
Think I'm going to give up sugar? Absolutely not.
Right.
Right. So we have to be, like you said, we have to have that strength to be able to dictate this is required in order for you to get to where I need you to go.
Yeah.
Period. It's like any kind of prescription. So I love that you shared that.
Thank you.
I love that you've been on the show. I love, everything that you're doing. I'm going to continue to promote you to all of my practitioners. What is the best way if people want to get your training, want to get information about your training? I know, your books are out there, but do you have some additional training that you're offering for clinicians?
Yeah, I think for now, just to find out all the crazy things I'm up to, whether I'm doing free lectures online, whether I'm doing podcasts, whether I'm speaking at summits or conferences, because I do a ton of those at medical, even CME environments, as well as for the lay public. But just follow me at drnasha.com. It has a list of all the things, all the books, all the things that you can follow down rabbit holes and see what resonates with you to learn more or to share. If you're a doctor listening to this, like some resources to share for your patients. If you don't have the time to say these things, there are lots of free resources for your patients to go and explore as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nasha, for being on the show. And I would love to put together, maybe this year, later in the year, something like a little summit with some of the top docs like you and Dr. Dr. Billstrom and some of the really top docs in their field, different specialties, and some overlapping, to talk about prevention, because we need to talk about prevention.
Go girl, we so do. Not smashing, radiating, and cameras, right? We got to do more things.
We got to do more for education, letting people know that this stuff is preventable.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. Really, really appreciate it.
All right. You have a great day, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Absolutely.